All right, let's run some tests here, see how everything is doing. Okay, all right, it looks like audio is coming through, so I think we're good. We're live. We are running full speed, full steam ahead, full whatever ahead. All right, let's do this. Welcome to the September 21st, 2020 Q&A for Naked Mormonism. We are on an official hiatus for the podcast, but I wanted to kick off the hiatus with a little Q&A today. So that's what we're doing. And well, we got deluged with quite a few questions. So I'm going to do my best to stumble my way through quite a few of these. And a lot of these questions are, don't have much to do with the show. A lot of them have to do with the Road to Carthage series. A lot of them have to do with the event or the aftermath of Joseph Smith's death and Nauvoo history more generally. The following, history of the church after Joseph's death. There's just a whole gamut of questions here to get to, as well as some very personal questions. We'll see if we get to those. But of course, I want to start off with questions from our patrons, because patreon.com/Naked Mormonism, you folks are the amazing people who are supporting the show, who are keeping the show going, keeping the lights on here at Ground Gnome Studios. So let's begin with a question from Shannon Grover, who is the resident general authority, as well as now co-host of the Glass Box podcast. Shannon asks, how are you planning to use this break to rejuvenate yourself? What are the book plans? What is the book about? And who is your favorite fan? Haha, just kidding. Don't answer that. So who is my favorite fan? All my patrons, of course. What are the book plans and what is the book about? So the amount of time, and there's another question that I'm going to get into this a little bit later as well. The time that I normally spent writing the scripts for the show is now being devoted to writing the actual chapters for the book. And the how we basically structured the Road to Carthage series was I hired Chris Smith to basically help me compile all of my show notes from the entire backlog of the show into these singular documents that can basically provide the skeleton for me to build the book on top of. So that's going to be kind of the general theme of the book. It will be basically a biography or a historiography of early Mormonism under Joseph Smith's reign. And the central thesis of it, of course, is going to be focusing on the more criminal aspects of Joseph Smith's empire, as well as the use of psychedelics in it. I'll be incorporating all of my research of psychedelics use into the book. And that's what the book is about. And that's kind of what the plans are. I don't have any estimate on how long it's going to take. I just don't know. How am I planning to use this break to rejuvenate yourself? Well, this break is also coming at a time that, well, it's 2020, and I feel like everybody's running on fumes lately. But my partner, my wife, is she's applying for jobs right now. She's going to be graduating with her PhD. So a bit of my time that I was unable to help her and support her through these final stages of writing her thesis or her dissertation and applying to jobs, all this time that I've devoted to the podcast is now time that I'm able to support her and to do chores around the house and to, go, like this morning, I went for a coffee run because she was applying to 2 different jobs and she just wanted some, delicious, really candy-like coffee to get her through the day. So just the little things to try and kind of help her get into the job market. So that's kind of what this break is going to be. And it's probably also going to involve us moving somewhere else in the country when she gets hired on and her graduating and all sorts of things. So there's kind of a whole lot of things that are slated for this whole break period. And if we're lucky enough, travel restrictions will be lifted and COVID restrictions will be lifted soon. Once the virus itself has subsided and infection rates have subsided and we can actually have a honeymoon, that'd be really cool. So yeah, that's kind of what the break is, or what's on the slate for the break anyway. Next, let's go to Jeff Anderson. And actually, Jeff Anderson is the person who helped me put together the scripts.nakedmormonismpodcast.com, the place where all of the show notes for the show are posted up. So Jeff asked this. Even after all of the content you did include, I still get the feeling of this largely faceless mob as I hear the story of the assassination of Joe. Is there any resource that helps shed light on who was there, like specific names and how they were personally affected that prompted them to act in this way? Did they believe that Governor Ford, wouldn't be able to carry out justice by the letter of the law? Sorry if this was covered. I promise I've been listening. So, um, Jeff, I know you've been listening. I know you're a hardcore fan. So this is actually really tough because there isn't a codified or structured list of the names of all of the people who were involved in it. Now, a couple of historians, Dan Vogel and Joseph Johnston, have put together what seems to be a relatively complete list of these names. Nobody recognizes those names. We recognize the names of the people who were prosecuted. Colonel Levi Williams, one of the most vitriolic anti-Mormons. Thomas Sharp, the editor and publisher of the Warsaw Signal, the most vocal anti-Mormon paper. Both of these guys were also the founding fathers of the anti-Mormon political party. So we know the names of the primary actors and the primary movers and the people who stood trial for the Carthage shootout. But the rest of the faceless mob is just really kind of that, faceless. What we do know about them is they were largely citizens of Warsaw and Carthage. Very few of them actually from Carthage, mostly from Warsaw. And the twin cities of Warsaw and Carthage were, the twin cities of anti-Mormonism. In Warsaw, right, that's where the Warsaw Signal was published, the anti-Mormon periodical by Thomas Sharp. Thomas Sharp was neighbors with all of those people who were reading his paper, the Warsaw Signal, and, getting riled up about the latest outrages of the Mormon Empire and Joe Smith. They were also the people who were feeding him information that he would then print in his paper. So those people, largely the mob who actually descended onto Carthage jail, they were largely citizens of Warsaw, Illinois. And they had been riled up against the Mormons by Thomas Sharp and just by the general tribalistic nature of us versus them mentality and this riling up of a civil war like mentality for 5 years since the Mormons started settling in 1839 and 1840 and never paid their bills. The citizens of Warsaw didn't like the Mormons for quite a while, for quite a few years before the Carthage shootout actually happened. So it was really only a matter of time before something like this happened. It was just that it took Joseph being in the Carthage jail for him to be vulnerable enough for them to actually put a plan into execution. And that's kind of what ended up happening. So the names, the list of names, we could read them out. Actually, I don't know if the list is actually published. I don't have it, but we could read it on air and you would recognize none of the names because they're people who just, they were all, soldiers in the state militia, and they were all under the command of Colonel Levi Williams and Captain Robert F. Smith and a few other people. And, the people who were, surrounded the jail cell, they didn't get, prosecuted for this. It was the 5 people who actually stood trial who we know the names of. So moving on, let's go to Julie's question here. And Julie asks, can you talk about the documents about the Carthage shootout you didn't use for the episode? Any interesting aftermath stories you didn't cover? What, if anything, could have stopped the shootout happening? Was it inevitable? So the shootout itself happening, was it inevitable? Joseph Smith dying was inevitable. Him being assassinated was inevitable. It was only a matter of time and circumstances to permit it. That's why he was so afraid of stepping out of Nauvoo, because he was no longer had the aegis of protection of his thousands of soldiers and his personal Danite bodyguards and the Nauvoo police force that were all Danites. As soon as he stepped outside of Nauvoo, he was vulnerable. And that's why he almost never left Nauvoo. He always sent people on missions out of Nauvoo to go do stuff for him. He very rarely left the city. And notably, the last time that he left Nauvoo for a significant period of time was to Dixon, Illinois in 1843. And he was arrested and almost extradited to Missouri. So he was very reticent to ever step out a foot outside of his kingdom because that would make him vulnerable. So it was inevitable that he would be assassinated, martyred, vigilante justice. it was only a matter of the stars aligning and the circumstances permitting vigilante justice happening. And that's what happened in Carthage. What, if anything, could have stopped the shootout from happening? That's tough, because all of the people who made it happen were in collusion, and any of the people who were there to stop it from happening weren't there. They fled. They ran away. Colonel Deming, that Governor Ford had personally appointed to oversee the guard duties and the changeover of the guards of the Carthage, he fled. Governor Ford told him to flee town if menaced by a superior force. He saw Levi Williams, 150 guys marching into town. He ran away. He was one of the few people who was, a person who was loyal to the due process of law, who could have done something, and he ran out of town. If Governor Ford would have not left Carthage, I don't think it would have happened. I think Governor Ford was the sole he was the actor he was the agent in Carthage and Nauvoo that stopped, or inhibited the violence from actually happening. And it's notable that the day he left is when the Carthage shootout happened. If Governor Ford had remained in Carthage, I don't think that the shootout would have happened. I think Joseph Smith would have stood trial for treason and may have been executed by court martial. And then who knows what would have happened. But on the flip side of that, Governor Ford leaving Carthage to go to give a public speech to the Mormons in Nauvoo, likely that in and of itself was the sole act that kept the Mormons from devolving into civil war when Joseph Smith died, and prior to it and immediately after it. Right. So Governor Ford credits Willard Richards and John Taylor's letter telling the Mormons not to act out, not to march out, and keep quiet. Governor Ford credits that letter with keeping the Mormons from marching into Carthage and burning the city down on the day after it happened. I credit Governor Ford's speech to the Mormons as being one of the sole factors that made it so the Mormons didn't march out of Nauvoo and go burn through Carthage and burn through Warsaw and then burn through any of the smaller, satellite anti-Mormon settlements near those two cities and begin their crusade of the state of Illinois and then cross the Mississippi and burn through Missouri. I think Governor Ford deserves the credit of keeping his state from spiraling into civil war and keeping a lid on the Mormon conflict for even the years after Joseph Smith died, and the violence being constrained or concealed, constrained, I guess, in just a couple of very tiny armed conflicts. The burning of the Yell Room settlement, the Battle of Nauvoo. There were very few casualties in any of these conflicts. Any more than that, then his state would have exploded. He deserves credit for keeping a lid on all of the tensions that were rising up. Documents about the Carthage shootout that I didn't use for the episode. When I actually went through the Carthage shootout itself, I spent, I said at the very top of the episode that most of the stories we talk about on Naked Mormonism are, contextualizing one or two documents. Like we have, we have these, 5 passages from Joseph Smith's journal, and then I build the episode around those passages in order to contextualize them. Or there's this one letter that I have to, put into context, and that's how I build the podcast and construct my show notes. I copy the document and paste it into a Word doc, and then I script all around whatever that source is. When it comes to Carthage, there are dozens of sources from eyewitnesses. So there was an abundance of stuff that I could not use just for want of time, because I didn't want the broadcast to be a 9-hour broadcast on just the Carthage shootout itself. Nobody would listen to it. And it went too long as it was. So the number of sources that I didn't use, I wish I would have spent more time on William Daniels's account, right? So William Daniels was the guy who was in the Warsaw troop that marched from Warsaw. They were headed to Nauvoo, and then they were met with Governor Ford's orders to disband, and then they turned course and head straight into Carthage. And that is the force that was under the command of Colonel Levi Williams, right? That force, William Daniels was supposedly a member of this force, and he participated in the shootout, not knowing what was exactly going to happen, but also in his statement, he said that he was aware that they had made, that Levi Williams had made a speech that they were headed to Carthage to kill Joseph Smith. There's a lot of contradictions in his testimony, but his story is super fascinating because he was not a Mormon. He joined the Mormons just 7 weeks before the hearing in late May of 1845. He gave his affidavit, which was then was embellished by a guy, Leland, I can't remember his name, Leland something or something Leland, who embellished the account and added like the voices on heaven, descending and saying that your work is done. And there's a pillar of light that descended and scared all of the people away. And then there was a kid who was apparently Governor Boggs' son who tried to cut off Joseph's head. There's no evidence for any of these things, but he made his affidavit, and then it was embellished by this Leland guy and then published in the Times and Seasons. So because it was published, William Daniels had to stick to that published story in his account, in his court testimony. And it served to be, the primary damaging force against the prosecution for the 5 people who were standing trial that day, because it was so embellished, because it was so unbelievable. I mean, these are not people who, lived 2,000 years ago, right? These are people who lived 180 years ago, and they're not idiots. They're generally scientifically minded people, and they believe in the supernatural the way that most people believe in the supernatural today, and that, God works in mysterious ways and little miracles and hashtag blessed and tender mercies. The concept in the 1840s of a pillar of light descending on a crowd of 150 people to stop a guy from, a corpse's head being cut off, that was too crazy for them to believe. And that, I feel like that is pretty notable. So William Daniels' account, I wish I would have spent more time on it. I'm glad I spent enough time on Frank Worrell's account. He was the guard of the Carthage jail who loaded his gun with blanks, and his, 6 fellow guards, they loaded their guns with blanks and then made a sham defense of the jail when Levi Williams' men came in. I tried to spend enough time on Frank Worrell's account because he's an important guy. Whether or not the guns were loaded with blank cartridges was a huge sticking point in the trial, because that illustrates collusion between the jail guards and Levi Williams's men. And William Daniels testified that they all knew that the guns were loaded with blank cartridges, and Frank Worrell refused to answer the question. And then Frank Worrell was assassinated by Pistol Pack and Porter Rockwell just a few months later, right? So like he was really interesting. But the trial, the transcript of the trial it's like 90 some odd pages. I would have loved to just read it straight through. I absolutely love to. And maybe that's something that, when the historical timeline gets to May of 1845, and this is the focus of the show, we can actually read through the entire transcript, or, longer portions of it. But to try and give it its due diligence, its due process in just, 30 to 40 minutes of a podcast episode, I couldn't do it. There was just so much there. And there are a ton of important details in it. One of the details, Thomas Sharp might have actually spent the night before the shootout in Carthage instead of Warsaw, meaning that he may have taken the information with him to Warsaw that morning that that Governor Ford was headed to Nauvoo, and went to Warsaw early that morning of the shootout and told Levi Williams, hey, Governor Ford's headed out of town. This is our chance. Let's get in there. Let's kill that guy. And then headed into Carthage and helped with the assassination. But there are also conflicting accounts as to whether or not Thomas Sharp was actually there. There's so many interesting details within the court transcript, and I just didn't spend enough time on it in the show. So next question, let's go over to Joshua Gray, and this is actually not related to Mormon history at all. It is what's your short list of favorite anime? And that's, well, I've made a couple references recently on Glassbox podcast to anime series. So shortlist, growing up, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, they were the shit, absolutely the bomb. Love that. Let's see. More recently, though, Full Metal Alchemist is obviously just one of the best. Full Metal Alchemist is so amazing, and it forces us to ask some really interesting and deep questions about what we consider knowledge and truth and information, and forces that are outside of our control. And it's just a fascinating exploration into human consciousness. Avatar: The Last Airbender, I know these are the ones that everybody answers, but Avatar, for being a kids show, taps into some really adult and important concepts, and it does so in a very friendly and pleasant way. And I enjoy how Avatar plays with your conceptions of good guy versus bad guy. You don't know at the beginning of the show that Zuko is going to turn out to be, one of the heroes. Spoiler alert! I said it after I made the spoiler. My bad. But he starts out as this firebrand kid who wants to become the Fire King, and by the end of it, the wisdom of Uncle Iroh has led him to have a complete change of heart, a complete change of everything that he is and what he values in life, and he becomes one of the heroes of the show. Right? Like it taps into some really incredible aspects of humanity that I think are not very well portrayed in a lot of Western media. So it's a great show. Attack on Titan is another amazing show because every episode you're confronted with the questions of what would I do if my life is threatened, or what ends will humans go to in order to ensure their own survivability, and what is, once again, what's the value of human life. So those are just a few of my favorites, watching them with much more opened eyes than watching Yu-Gi-Oh as a kid. So yeah, Attack on Titan, Full Metal Alchemist, Avatar: The Last Airbender, Jackie Chan. That was a great anime show when I was a kid. Yeah. Uncle must do research. That was my favorite line. It's great. It's great. So yeah, that was just a fun question here. Let's go to another question from Julie. And Julie, this is our social media expert, friend of the show, Julie. She asks, can you expound on Samuel Smith's death several weeks after his brothers died? What was Willard Richards' involvement? And Brigham Young is also commonly assumed to be involved. What, if any, was his involvement in the death? So, immediately after Carthage, John Taylor was far too near death to be a valuable leader. And that essentially left Willard Richards as the guy in charge. And Willard Richards is a fascinating guy because many people see Richards as he was the scribe of Joseph Smith. Therefore, he's equal to, let's say, like John Whitmer or like William Clayton. But he's not. Willard Richards was not just a scribe. He was also a brilliant coordinator. And in many ways, he was kind of, if you're a Game of Thrones watcher, he was kind of a Varys of Nauvoo. I don't know, I said that about Dan Jones, the guy who ran the ferry in Nauvoo, but very much so for Willard Richards too. He was valuable to Joseph Smith as his scribe because the guy knew everything that went on in town. He traded in information, and he was really good at information. He became the sole leader of the church for the month of July 1844, when the whole church was thrown into chaos and turmoil. Notably, Samuel Smith had claim to the throne because it was a patrilineal succession church. It was a church where Joseph Smith Sr. was the patriarch, the father of the church, the patriarch of the church, not the patriarch to the church. That operative word is very important, especially when it comes to the succession crisis. With his death, Joseph and Hiram are the prophet, president, and prophet, seer, and revelator of the church, and the patriarch of the church. With their deaths, it was to fall to another Smith son until Joseph III was old enough to take over the church. William Smith was resoundingly hated by basically everybody in town. He was never a strong contender, but Samuel Smith was young enough, he was calculated enough, and he was smart enough to run the church after his brothers had died. Samuel Smith was a massive threat, and I believe that Willard Richards saw Samuel was a massive threat. And when Samuel made the case that he is essentially the leader of the church now, and he had the backing of Emma and of Lucy Mack Smith, which are two of the most important indicators of the general populace of the church, as well as William Marks, the stake president, William Marks. He had their backing. That meant that Samuel Smith had the backing of the public, of the large majority of the Mormons, that he would be the leader, he would be the guardian of the church until Joseph III, who had been ordained by blessing just 5 months prior, was old enough to take the mantle. Willard Richards recognized this, and he had to get rid of Samuel Smith. So Samuel Smith had to go away, and the way that he did that, that Willard Richards was able to accomplish that, was by poisoning him. Now, whether or not he did that unilaterally, or he did that after exchanging letters with Brigham Young, that's tough to say, because Brigham Young was constantly moving, and it was very hard to get information back and forth from Nauvoo to Brigham Young, who was in the eastern states, and traveling back to Nauvoo reliably. So I think that Willard Richards probably was a sole actor in it, and he commissioned the help of Hosea Stout to make it happen. Hosea Stout was, he was a Richards and Brigham loyalist, but I don't think that there would be any way for Brigham Young to have coordinated deliberately, poison Samuel Smith. It may have been the case that Willard Richards sent Brigham Young a letter on July 8th, and that would have been the day before Brigham Young even learned that Joseph and Hiram had been assassinated, because he was in Boston, right? It may have been the case that Willard Richards wrote a letter on July 8th when Samuel Smith made the argument that he was the guardian of the church. He sent a letter immediately by express to Brigham Young saying, Samuel is laying claim to the throne. What should we do about him? And then Brigham Young got a letter back, but the time span is just so tight. It's hard to get a letter from Nauvoo to Boston and from Boston back to Nauvoo in the span of 3 weeks that it actually happened. That's just a really, really tight time frame. So that leads me to believe that it was Willard Richards made the decision Samuel Smith had to go, and he told Hosea Stout to do it. And it happened. I think Brigham Young is commonly assumed to be involved because he inherited the mantle, and he was able to successfully squeeze out Crazy William Smith. I don't think that it's reasonable to assume that Brigham Young actually told Willard Richards to poison Samuel Smith. The time frame just doesn't quite match up. It's just too tight of a time frame to get the communication back and forth. I think it's all on Whiteout Willard Richards. What, if any, was his involvement in the death, Brigham Young? That's really tough to tell. So let's go to let's see, another question from Julie here. What is your favorite story from Mormon history? And that is a really, really tough one, because it's a matter of what mood am I in, concerning what aspect of Mormon history. It's tough to kind of tell. If I want to do an anti-Mormon jab, Joseph Smith obviously wasn't a prophet because of this, then I point to the Kinderhook plates or the Greek Psalter incident, right? I mean, those are just so resoundingly proving that Joseph Smith was not what he claimed to be. They're just hilarious stories. They're just funny. Favorite story of my own personal research is the Kirtland Temple dedication ceremony. I love that thing. It's such a fascinating aspect of Mormon history, and it's something that it's near and dear to my heart because it's my pet research project with psychedelics and early Mormonism. So that's kind of my favorite. What's my favorite to maybe illustrate why the church today is the way that it is? The stories of the Reformation and how the Reformation came to be, the whole Reformation era of the church, which spanned 2 years, basically 1856 to late 1857. Those are fascinating stories because they tell us about why the church is the way it is today. Other fun stories: Heber J. Grant going and speaking in Germany at a panel discussion with a swastika behind him. That's fucking bonkers. That's crazy, isn't it? The Mormons were very comfortable in Nazi Germany. That's a fun story too. There are plenty of fun stories. I can't pick one. I can't pick one, Julie. I'm sorry. So I'm just looking over at the comments on the YouTube channel here. Let's see. Zuko had a very spiritual experience when he mourned the loss of his previous self and became someone new. Yeah. That's exactly it. Yep. Any of these others? Let's see. Other questions from this. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Let's just keep going with more questions from our patrons. We have another question from Joshua Gray. It says, as a thought experiment, how different would the church be today if Joe had survived the shooting? Would he have moved west to the Utah Territory or stayed in Nauvoo? Obviously, there are a lot of ifs factors, but it might be fun to think about. Haha. Yeah, a lot of ifs in that. If Joe had survived the shooting. And the only way that I see that happening is the shooting didn't happen because they were there to kill him. The troops from Warsaw, they were an overwhelming force. Joe was not going to survive that day. So if, let's say, Governor Ford had stayed in Carthage, he never went to Nauvoo. They had a court hearing, court martial on the charges of inciting riot and treason, and Joe was acquitted of both of them and allowed to return back to Nauvoo, cleared of all the charges. What would have happened? And those are questions that I spend a lot of time thinking about, but I don't have any answers to, because then it becomes a question of what's Joe's next move, and that's obviously getting the Mormons further west, where they wouldn't be bothered. The Rocky Mountains were one of his best locations, one of his best choices, but I don't think Joe was smart enough to build a settlement in the desert of Utah. He just wasn't. Brigham Young absolutely was. If Joe would have been able to put his pride aside and give more power to Brigham Young figures, he could have been the Mormon settlement could have been built in Utah, and it probably wouldn't look much different than it does today. Except it would have happened under Joseph Smith, and he would have died in 1870s, 1880s, whenever of old age, the way Brigham Young did, and the history might not be all that different. But the problem is the trajectory of the church under Brigham Young and the trajectory under Joseph Smith. One was empire building, Brigham Young. The other was an infinite aspiration, and that's Joseph Smith, right? One is to become the most powerful man on earth. The other was to become God on earth. And Brigham Young eventually became, comfortable with his kingdom, with his empire. And Joseph Smith could never handle being bored. He never stopped expanding his empire. So in that regard, I think Joseph may have been a bit more militant against the government and President Buchanan trying to bring in a non-Mormon governor of the Utah Territory. Brigham Young basically acquiesced as Buchanan's troops were descending onto Utah and about to kick off the Mormon-Utah War. Brigham Young eventually just said, okay, well, you can put in a new governor, but he's going to be living in Utah, and we'll see how that goes. And, I don't think Joe would have let that happen. If Joe was named governor of Utah Territory the way that Brigham Young was, I don't think he ever would have given up his throne. And then who knows what that looks like? Who knows what Mormon history and American history looks like? Because the implications of that are far reaching and involve millions of people and infinite variables. So great question. Think about it. Maybe, yeah. What do you think? What do you think the Mormon Empire under, continued Joseph Smith's reign actually looks like? Isn't there a suspicion that Brigham Young died of poisoning? I don't know about that. Possibly. It wouldn't surprise me, but he was also, in his early 70s, which somebody in the 1870s living into their 70s is pretty remarkable. It's pretty remarkable, especially a man that lived the hard and fast life that Brigham Young did. Let's see. Another question. Do you think any of the splinter churches like the Community of Christ will grow in popularity or just slowly shrink domestically like the Brighamite Church? Community of Christ is drying up just like the Brighamite Church. Just like most churches right now in America, they are hemorrhaging members, especially millennials and younger members. The internet is the knife to the jugular of religion, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely beautiful. So, Community of Christ, they've been following very similar trends of progressive Christian churches in America, which is they're having a hard time retaining their current members, and they're having almost no success with conversions, except in Africa, in non-industrialized countries. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Let's see. Next question. Let's go down here a little bit. All right. So maybe the most important question of the night. I think this is actually the most important question I have ever been asked. And this is from Julie, personal friend of mine, friend of the show, social media manager. Julie, if you could have any one car in the world, what would it be? Damn, that's a tough one. Any one car in the world. So there are so many possible answers, but just one. Just have it, not have to pay attention, not have to care about maintenance costs, insurance costs, none of that. Money not an object. Any one car. It's McLaren F1. It's the greatest. It's simply the greatest. I'd love to see the new T50. I'd love to see what it's going to turn out to be like. But the McLaren F1, that's it. And if you don't know what that car is about, Google it. Mr. Bean wrecked one. So did Elon Musk. Elon Musk daily drove one. It's a $15 million car now, and Elon Musk wrecked one before he started Tesla, or when he just had started Tesla or something. That's the one. All right, let's look here. I think that's all of our questions from the patrons. All right. One more question from Shannon Grover. What are your plans when you start Nemo episodes again? Are you going to keep it going the same or make changes to format, etc.? And this is a question I tried to kind of play around with a lot, and I'm actually talking to a few people who I trust their judgment on this about the future of the show. And there are a few options that are available, and it's a matter of picking what I think will be the best option. First off, a continued serialized history of Mormon history that's going to continue. A podcast form of the succession crisis of Utah history. I'm going to keep doing that in one form or another. So if you've enjoyed Naked Mormonism and the serialized history, stick around. I'm going to keep doing that. Whether that will be on Naked Mormonism or not is another question, because I also have the thought that I kind of want to keep Naked Mormonism as basically a self-contained Joseph Smith history. Which means that the podcast can take on new directions. And what that new direction would be, in my mind, would be a D&D podcast, right? A D&D Mormon history podcast. And the logic behind this is, and I would love to hear what anybody thinks about this, but the logic behind it is, here is an entire backlog of 224 episodes of a podcast that's serialized history. And sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's really complicated, sometimes it's funny. Who knows, right? Like, there's a lot of variability in it, but there's generally the consistency of me writing an essay on Mormon history, contextualizing documents, and then telling the story of those documents to the audience. The problem that I've had with the podcast is we are so deeply mired in the stories that it's really hard to see the larger picture, right? And it's very hard to see to use anything that is presented in the podcast as a jab, as an anti-Mormon jab, when somebody's making some bullshit apologetic argument about Joseph Smith or about the church or about the theology or about whatever, right? Because it's so wrapped up in the story, right? If you want to have anti-Mormon jabs, you read the CES letter, you listen to Radio Free Mormon, you listen to those systematic deconstructions and demystifications of these individual aspects of Mormon history. That's not the format of this show, which means that this show is never going to go viral, because it requires an investment of attention and time and energy from the listener in order to understand the stories within context. However, if we are able to transport people into the world and have those people interact with that world with me as the game master, then it can put some of the stories into context and end every episode of the D&D show with, resources, with saying that you can learn about the story in this chapter of this book or on these episodes of the podcast or whatever. So as the players navigate early Mormon history, as they navigate what's going on in Kirtland, as they go run errands in order to pick up the printing plates for the Kirtland Safety Society Bank Company, right? They're interacting with figures within the story. They're interacting with the people who are, actually the figures of the history itself. And we're seeing the timeline basically constructed as an abstract construct or concept in our mind. So I kind of want to do that. And it's kind of with that logic that I did the Road to Carthage series, was because there's so much data in the podcast backlog that I wanted to put it all into a concise series, a concise place where you can understand the overarching trends, overarching story of Mormon history. And I think that would adapt itself very well to having a D&D campaign. So what the future of that looks like, if that is the decision, is Naked Mormonism up to, episode 1 to episode 224. That is the serialized history of Joseph Smith. And then beginning after that immediately is the first episode of Zion, which is the second half of episode 200. And from there, it turns into a D&D campaign where players interact with the world of Mormon history. I would love that. And that's kind of the direction I'm leaning towards, right? Obviously, because I've spent most of the time talking about it. However, there's also the need to continue the serialized history in long form, storytelling format in the way that I understand it. And that requires doing the succession crisis and Utah history through the serialized history. That becomes infinitely more complicated because for almost the entire podcast, I've had the Joseph Smith papers. Any document that I need is online somewhere, whether it's on Joseph Smith papers or it's, privately hosted somewhere. When we get into the succession crisis, that requires us to explore breakoff factions that don't have digitalized repositories of documents, that I'm going to have to actually reach out to individual researchers specifically and say, hey, can I have a copy of this document? And the production of the show is going to rely on those individuals complying with that request. And that's going to make it a lot harder for the succession crisis. And then for Utah history, unfortunately, most of Utah history documents are suppressed or they are not cataloged. They're just in vaults and private collections. And there is no public repository of all Utah history documents. And I mean, it gets so much more complex in Utah, especially just Brigham Young era, just from 1847 to 1877, just that 30-year period is insanely complex, and it has ramifications that extend through the entire world, and play into the settlement of America, into the colonization of America. Those are hard things to do. when I transitioned from from Missouri to Nauvoo on the show, I was intimidated by how much more complex Nauvoo gets. Utah is Utah is just orders of magnitude more complex than Nauvoo is. I'm intimidated by that. That's going to require way more than just me. That's going to require a team of researchers to do it, which means that's, doing the serialized history of Utah Mormonism, the way that I've done Naked Mormonism. That's a project that's a couple of decades long. That's going to require an entire research and writing staff. That's a goal that's 50 years in the future for me, right? That's a goal that's going to be the occupation for the rest of my life after I'm able to get some other projects done, and continue increasing interest in Mormon history in general. So anyway, and then, when I die, somebody's going to have to take over going through the rest of Utah history, because there's no fucking way I'm going to get all the way to the modern day history in the depth that I do serialized history at the pace that I do. It's impossible. It's impossible. So future of the show, it's all a big question mark at the moment. All right. So let's, I want to go to, I got in an email actually from Evan, and they say, hey Bryce, I have a question for you. The LDS Church has its official narrative regarding the gold plates, how Smith got them, what he did with them, how he translated them, and what he did with them after he translated the Book of Mormon. Okay. However, over the years, I've seen folks give quotes from some early Mormons about the golden plates that aren't the official narrative. They paint a picture of how, as with all things within Mormonism, the story changed and developed over time. I've also heard folks talk about how Smith's occult beliefs played into the original narrative of him finding a book made out of gold. I'm having trouble finding a centralized place for all of these quotes and variances in the story of the golden plates. Would you know where I can find something like this? So for actual quotes that are not the correlated history quotes, there are only a couple of them. I would highly recommend the Mormon Think article on the Book of Mormon, because it'll allow you to explore the spalling theory. It'll allow you to explore many other aspects of the Book of Mormon narrative and the history that we actually have access to beyond the Mormon narrative of it. But as for people who witnessed the plates outside of that correlated narrative, outside of the 11 witnesses, you basically have Josiah Stout and a couple of really late reminiscences from some people who are like, I swear I'm going to see it. They rip off the cloth that was covering the plates, and it's just a rock. There are a couple of quotes like that come from later sources, and you can find basically all of them on various Mormon Think articles about the Book of Mormon and the gold plates. That's where I would point you to, because, well, Mormon Think is actually a really great resource. It really helped me a lot in the early era of the show. And I believe I even referenced it quite a lot in the early show, because it just does a very simple and accessible overview of the believing Mormon narrative, of the critical narrative, and what the documents say. So check out mormonthink.com. You can, just use their search bar, look for gold plates, look for Book of Mormon, and just spend a few hours in front of your screen and just read. That's the best I can do for you, Evan. So, I want to move to some questions from Facebook, and we're already near the hour mark here. Let's see. You know what? I another question from the YouTube comments section here. From Tom, do you think there are any documents missing from the Joseph Smith papers? Like, how complete do you think that is? That's a tough one. So Joseph Smith papers has been so good, so very good with uploading most things that they have and that have been requested of them. And I'll also say, with the Joseph Smith papers, most of the documents that they have uploaded there are today in church archives, but didn't originally come from church archives. Almost all of the documents that Joseph Smith Papers has published were gifted to the church by estates of people who are the descendants of the figures who had the documents. So when we read like the letters that they have on record from Heber to Vallot Kimball, those were in the Kimball estate that were then donated to the church. Same with the William Clayton journals. Same with so many other documents, which begs the question that there are obviously so many more documents that no historians know about, that are still in people's attics, that are still who knows where. Probably not that many now from the Nauvoo history, because basically all the documents that we know of have been tracked down, or we are at least aware that a document did exist at some point. So, barring some discovery of, a large repository, or of a couple of filing cabinets, or of even just a couple of journals, most of, early Mormon history from the Joseph Smith era is uploaded through the Joseph Smith papers, because all of those documents have been gifted to the church by Mormons. With that said, the church has also gone on a brutal campaign of purchasing all these documents. And not purchasing them, in most cases, not purchasing them directly, but instead having wealthy Mormons, document collectors, rare document and book collectors, purchase those things and then give them to the church from private collectors. And all of those documents, that leads to the expanding of so many more possible documents that the church was able to purchase that no private collectors were ever aware of. And that makes it even harder, because there are so many stories of people within the early to mid 1900s reading their grandma's journal and reading about the stories of polygamy and reading about these things when they are kids, and not knowing that this is how things were going on in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s in Utah, not believing it, thinking that it's all horrible, giving them bad feelings, and then burning those journals, or just ripping out pages of them. And those are really tough. Like, those are documents that are lost to history, that are gone forever. So how much then of Joseph Smith history is uploaded on Joseph Smith papers? We don't have any way of knowing, because we don't actually have any way of quantifying how many documents are actually out there. We do know of a few consequential documents that they have yet to release, and the ones that they have released only because historians were crying for decades for them to release them. The Book of the Law of the Lord is a great example of that. Joseph Smith's journal, and Dean Jesse having to deal with the church authorizing him to publish extracts or a synopsis of his journals without being able to publish the actual documents themselves. The William Clayton journals, the Council of 50 Minutes. There are a number of documents, a number of journals that the church has systematically suppressed, but has allowed to be published through the Joseph Smith papers. But we don't know how much is really out there. We don't know how much are in the secret archives. We don't know how much is in the First Presidency's vault. And we also don't know how much are in private collections. The Wilford Wood collection is one that's really notable, that they probably have so many documents and so many books and probably a number of journals that will probably never see the light of day, will probably never leave the Wood family, and they will probably never show to researchers to be published, because the Wood family are very, very secretive and very guarded about what they show to visitors and what they show to researchers. And the Wood family is the largest private collection of Mormon documents and artifacts outside of the church. So they have stuff in their warehouses, to multiple warehouses, that people will never see, that are just sitting and rotting from mold and rat shit. And that sucks. That sucks. So there's no way to quantify how much is out there. There's no way to quantify how much the church has published. All we can do is say, thank you for publishing what you have. And hey, can I send in a request to have you publish this document? I know you have it. Can you please publish it? And Joseph Smith Papers is usually pretty good about publishing those. So let's move on to some Facebook questions. And so we have a lot of Facebook questions, and a whole bunch of them came in from Richard Pekjak. I don't actually know if it's Pekjak or Pekyak. Pekiak? I'm not sure. Anyway, there's a bunch of rapid fire questions that he asked, so I think I'm going to end on those. Let's do one from Randy Todd Lamonda, longtime fan of the show. What's next? And will you put the family home evening on your feed? So what's next is, we'll already discussed that. Will I put the family home evening episodes on the feed? I'm still going to be doing occasional Patreon exclusive episodes. For this live Q&A, I'm going to publish or put the audio, the high quality audio of this on the Patreon exclusive feed, patreon.com/Naked Mormonism. Yeah, I got to plug it again. And I'm going to be doing periodic episodes, whether they're episodes that I, just like what's going on, or documents that I discovered, or the development of the book, various status updates on how the book is coming along, or whether they're just, kind of hangouts like this with, a week notice of, hey, we're doing a live hangout online, inviting a friend on to do kind of like a guest hosting thing. I'm still going to be doing those during the hiatus. So if you're not on Patreon, do it because it's free during hiatus. I'm not going to charge for any of those episodes. So there will be still family home evenings. There's still going to be stuff that's posted up for patrons only. It's just the public feed that is on hiatus. So all you patrons, you get a little extra special stuff. Comment/question that came in from Jeffrey. Cameron Sewer says, damn, the Road to Carthage series was amazing. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the show going on, but enjoy your hiatus. Questions. Damn, I suck at those. How long do you foresee the time between Joseph's death and the Brighamite run Nauvoo exodus to Utah panning out in the show? And that's a big question because, as I said earlier, me doing serialized Mormon history is still going to be in podcast format somewhere, somehow in the future. It's just a matter of what that looks like, whether that's on this feed or whether that's in a podcast feed that isn't Naked Mormonism. That's not going to immediately scare off anybody who's looking for that history. Basically, the only way that I figured out that I can do the succession crisis is by doing individual series, individual kind of story arcs within a series that will be season 2. And season 2 will be the succession crisis. And these individual story arcs are going to have to be following James Strang, following Alpheus Cutler, following Lyman White, following the individual claimants to the throne, to the succession crisis, and just doing individual series on those people. So each of those series will, focus on them, but also include the interplay of them with all of the other leading figures within the Mormon movement, because we see these, sharp delineations between these figures nowadays. We're able to say, this is the Bickertonite church, this is the Rigdonite church, this is the Cutlerite church, this is the Strangite church. We can draw those sharp lines today, but at the time it was far more chaotic, and the people making the decisions of who to follow, it was much less clear for them what each of those groups would do, what the future of each of those groups were. So basically, my view of it is creating individual story arcs within the season 2 or whatever this podcast will be. And each of those individual story arcs are going to follow each of those primary figures and how they're important, and then go through basically their entire lives. So I'll go through the entire Strangite church all the way up until he died or was assassinated in like 1856 or 57, whenever he died. And then go through the entire William Bickerton church and just do from top to bottom who they are when they joined Joe's church or when they joined the Mormon movement, and what their life did and how they interacted with the rest or with the other sects after that point. And then just go from there. And then, of course, the largest of these is going to have to be the Utah. So these will be individual series within this season 2 kind of Naked Mormonism. That's how I'm presenting it now, subject to change. And then season 3 is going to have to be Utah history. How long is that going to take? I don't know. I don't even know how long it's going to take for me to actually publish this damn book. I don't know. I just hope you stick around. That's all I can say. I hope you stick around, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so you know what? Why don't we get to Richard's questions? And this is going to round us out because these are rapid fire questions, quick questions, hopefully more quick answers. We shall see. First one from Richard is outstanding job. How do you really feel about Joseph? If you could go back in time to follow him around and take notes or kick him in the balls immediately and then poison him slowly, what would you do? I assume he was asking. I'm waiting for your book or Netflix miniseries. Yeah, Netflix series. Yeah. Hey, if someone has a contact, hit me up. We'll see. Um, so, how do I feel about Joseph Smith? He's an asshole. He's a truly evil human being who was incapable of seeing himself as evil, which is the worst kind of evil. We see individuals that emulate this, that reflect this, that check these same sociopathic boxes around us every day, and sometimes they even lead our country. Yeah, that's how I really feel about him. I also have kind of a sick, like a morbid admiration for him because it's like, Jesus Christ, he reveals to us that somebody can just get so far in life by purely fucking over people and just lying every single moment of every single day, lying about everything around them and everything that they've done and everything that they are. It's like, you know what, that TED talk, that went viral of like, fake it till you become it. Like, Joe absolutely did. That is the great American dream, isn't it? Just lie about shit and then retire fat and happy and fuck everybody who you left behind in your warpath getting to that point, right? It's a morbid admiration. I admire him the same way that I admire like the Rockefellers or any other like super powerful, super wealthy, monstrous asshole in history. He's, it's a morbid fascination. Maybe admiration probably isn't the right word. Fascination, I guess, is probably a better way for it. I would follow him around and take notes. But would I poison him, kick him in the balls, and then poison him slowly? Would I do that? That's like asking, would you go back in time and kill Hitler's dad? Yeah, fuck yeah. Are you kidding me? To mitigate the human suffering that resulted from him and his legacy? Fuck yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. He dies. A lot of people's don't suffer a whole lot. All right. Next question. As a someday parent, how would you teach your children spirituality and religious traditions? And then another question: if and hopefully when you and Annie have a baby, what are your favorite male, female Book of Mormon names or Jello belt variation? How about 1830 to 1845 characters? So Annie and I are dinks, and we're gonna stay that way. Dual income, no children. We kind of like that. It's really great. I think it's kind of immoral to have kids right now. This is a bad time. It's a bad world to have kids. This world isn't populated enough yet. So how do you teach kids about spirituality and religious traditions? Go listen to Marriage on a Tightrope, or go listen to any other interfaith podcast, or go listen to somebody who is actually a parent and who actually plans on being a parent. I got no answers. All I can say is teach them all of them. Teach them all of religions and spiritualities. Comparative religions, I think, should be standard courses in schooling. Favorite male and female Book of Mormon names. There's like 2 female names, right? Sariah and I can't even remember the other female name. Is Esther? No. Is it Esther? I can't remember. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter because women are not even pawns in the Book of Mormon. But 1830 to 45 characters. I love the name Eliza. I know that maybe because Eliza Snow's my history crush, but also I just love the name Eliza a lot. I also love the name Violet. And people bicker and argue about whether it's Violet Kimball or Velote or Velote Kimball. The way that Heber Kimball wrote it with his terrible grammar was Velote. But I like Violet. Violet's a really pretty name. Male names. Abish. Abish is the other female name. Thank you. That's a terrible name for today. Other male names. I think the male name Sydney is actually really cool as well. Sydney Rigdon. The Lamanite woman from the Ammon story. That's who she is. Abish. Thank you for Bi Reality, Julie. And for everybody who added that, who said that in the YouTube comment section. Um, yeah, uh, there are some really nice names in 1830 to 45 characters, and Emma's like a really pretty name as well. Um, Alpheus it feels like Alpheus is a name that should not have been lost to time because it's so sophisticated sounding. You sound like a comic book hero, or that could just be Full Metal Alchemist coming back to me again, Alphonse, Alpheus. But I just like that name as well. There are lots of cool names. All right, next question from Richard. Looking back, who would have been the best heir to Joseph's throne? Which sect of Heavenly Father's one true super special clubhouse most resemble his OG church? That would be James Strang. James Strang absolutely would have been the best heir because he was the spiritual, charismatic leader that Joseph Smith was. He was the spiritual successor to Joseph Smith. But it also wasn't successful, right? Dude was shot like with a cop standing there watching him get shot because he was a monstrous asshole. It's weird how like these charismatic religious leaders are all assholes. If you had a dream job, what would it be? This one. Are you ready to get a grocery store job like Dan Vogel? No, it'd be car sales, but possibly. What is your greatest entheogen experience? My first actual entheogenic experience, which isn't the same as my first time taking psychedelics. My first truly entheogenic experience was a Native American peyote ritual, and it was fascinating. It's just amazing to watch the construction of the entire spiritualism and the ritual. The chanting, the participants were also all very, very, let's just say, very astute users of peyote. And a lot of the people there, like one of the people who was there is like a self-proclaimed expert on peyote songs, a Native American woman. And this is like her life journey, her life passion was to learn as many peyote songs as possible because they're never written down. And when they are written down, they're changed, they're deliberately shifted, they're deliberately altered because it's the pale faces that write down things. So sure, it was fascinating. I spoke with her for probably half an hour about her journey learning these peyote songs and listening to her singing them during the actual ceremony. The actual ritual itself was so beautiful. It was captivating. It was, for lack of better words, it was an incredibly spiritual experience. And yes, it's interesting. Atheists can have spiritual experiences. Just that word is so loaded that I haven't found a better word for what that feeling is or what that experience really is. So is there anything about Joseph you really admire? I kind of answered that earlier. It's kind of a weird, morbid admiration or morbid fascination. Of how people who make a career out of lying and out of bilking people and just as a career grifter can rise to power and can create a cult of personality and how effective they can be at that. I think Joseph is an incredibly interesting case study into what drives populist movements. Favorite characters, Emma or Eliza or both? Wait, hang on. Sorry, it says, who were your favorite characters, Annie or Eliza or both? Well, let's see. How do I answer that? Richard, do you actually mean Annie or Eliza, or do you mean Emma or Eliza? I'm going to answer that as Emma or Eliza. Personally, I like both of them for different reasons. Emma was such a badass. She was able to deal with shit for so long, and she was such a power player. And she was also, I believe, technically the wealthiest woman in America after Joseph's death, which is super interesting. But Eliza became the most powerful woman in American history at that time, which is really fascinating. I believe that it is because of Eliza that I am here today. If not for Eliza and her powers of organization and cobbling people together and unifying people, the Mormon settlement never would have survived. And so I credit Eliza with that. That means that I kind of owe my life to Eliza, and I don't think I owe my life and culture as much to Emma as I do to Eliza. So take that for what it's worth. And Eliza, I also just have a little bit more of a crush on, and those are things that, those, you don't really have good reasons for those things. You just do. What do you think of the future of the Brighamite Church? Is big question, something I try and explore on basically, most public fora that I do that are not my podcast. What is the future of the Brighamite Church is succinctly: membership will continue to dwindle. Bank accounts will continue to inflate. The old leadership will continue to gentrify. As medicine gets better, we're going to begin to see our first prophets that are over 100, which is going to be really interesting to see what falls out of their senile fucking skulls. And, the membership that they have currently, their membership of 6 million or whatever, is going to continue drying up. And that's sucks for them. Good luck. Let's see. Are you going to guest star on other podcasts? Yes, absolutely. Have a few things in the works right now. Check out Mythovision coming up pretty soon. I'm going to be doing a series with David Fitzgerald, as well as the host of Mythovision, who's putting us together. And we're going to go through just kind of a general overview of early Mormon history, as well as Mormon theology. But there will also be others. Keep an eye on the Facebook and Twitter pages. Hey, follow us on social media if you aren't, because myself and Julie are going to keep everybody updated on any public appearances I do, any talks that I do, anything like that. Also, brief point of order. I had scheduled April of this year on Bicycle Day a speech in Salt Lake City, a lecture, as well as a tour of Gilgal Gardens. Obviously, COVID wiped that off the slate. We have scheduled that for April 18th, 2021. With the hopes that by April 2021, enough vaccines will be out that we are able to achieve essentially herd immunity and be able to socially distance and still be able to conduct that lecture and that walking tour safely. So I will more than likely be in Utah giving that speech in April 2021. But once again, we got to kind of just hold off and hope that that's going to be a possibility. Get out there and vote, because it fucking matters. All right. What was your favorite Naked Mormonism since you started? Did you ever consider quitting before now? Favorite Naked Mormonism moment since you started? That's so tough. That's a really tough one. I am going to have to say it was my first Sunstone that I attended. And what was it? It was like the first lecture on Thursday morning. And it was a lecture that was in, as U of U, and I'm just recalling this from memory. It was a lecture talking about the church's role in climate change. And I'd like to think that it was D. Michael Quinn who was on the panel. And they did their lecture, and I got up and asked a question. And I came and sat down, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you Bryce Blankenagel?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "I thought I recognized that voice." And he introduced himself, Chuck Simmons, and said, "I'm a huge fan. I listened to everything twice, and I just love everything you do." And I've been doing the podcast for about a year at the time, I think, maybe a little bit less than that, actually, less than a year. And to have to meet my first fan at a Mormon history conference, that was when it was like, I see the emails. I get the emails and I get the tweets and the Facebook mentions from people. And, I get written messages from people saying that they love the show. That was my first time meeting a fan of the show in the flesh, shaking his hand, getting to actually meet him and know him. And from that point forward, I was like, holy shit, this feels so good. This feels good. This is evidence that the work that I'm doing is not for nothing. And that felt really good. So that was probably my favorite moment. And I am so glad that at that point I had already decided that this is my passion. I'm going to be doing this. And, there was nothing that was going to stop me. It was just nice to see that people appreciated it face to face. Had I ever considered quitting before now or going on hiatus? Holy shit. Yeah, a lot. I'll tell you, like, putting this podcast together is so much goddamn work. Naked Mormonism is so much work, right? And when I started the podcast, I did a lot of, what is it? Imitation is the best form of flattery. I tried to emulate successful podcasts, and I did that in order to develop my own style that would be my own style, but I couldn't develop my own style out of nothing. I had to pattern off of other successful podcasts. And obviously, if you listen to the early shows, it was Dan Carlin. It was so hardcore Mormon history, right? And I made no bones about that fact. Like I even, said that I enjoy hardcore history in the early shows, right? So that helped me develop the style a lot. I didn't this isn't shots fired or anything at Dan Carlin, but putting together 15 to 25 page essays every single week and recording those and editing those, publishing those, and then working on, all of the other back end stuff that, owning a small business entails is so much work. I work so much harder now than I did than I ever have at any day job, but it's so much more rewarding because I have something to show for it. There's no escaping the fact that this podcast, there are aspects of it that have been an absolute grind. It doesn't matter if something is your passion. If it requires a lot of work, it's still going to feel like a grind, even though it is a passion. And that's what the show has always been. And it's been an interest in finding Mormon history and learning Mormon history, grasping it, and then telling the stories for other people to understand it the way that I understand it. It's a rewarding journey, but holy shit, it has been so much work. Have I ever contemplated stopping it? Yeah. Most when those feelings hit the most is when I get a bad iTunes review or I get an email in from somebody saying that this sucks or that they hate the show. Like you get one of those emails, one of those iTunes reviews, and it ruins your fucking week or your month. That shit weighs on you for days or weeks after. And you never want to quit an artistic or a creative endeavor more than when you have somebody say that they hate what you're doing. So after every one of those emails and iTunes reviews, yeah, why am I even doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? Researching hard aspects of Mormon history have caused me to break down quite a few times. The Mountain Meadows, or not Mountain Meadows, the Haun's Mill Massacre. A lot of polygamy episodes have caused me to just completely break in half and be completely disconnected and depressed for days after doing the research for them and publishing them. And, maybe you can hear it in the tone of the voice on those episodes. Maybe not. I don't know. I try and be relatively consistent, but there have been episodes that I've done that have just crushed me, absolutely crushed me. And I've wanted to say, well, I don't need to do another episode ever again, do I? I don't have to keep doing this because it's a punishment. But eventually I extract myself out of those. I dig myself out of those holes, and then I keep at it. So I have thought of quitting many times, but I can't let myself do it. I wouldn't feel good about it. And I know that my life would be worse if I quit doing what I'm doing. What surprised you most to discover? Everything. I discover something new every week on the show, and I share it with all of you, and I share my excitement about those discoveries. If you got to go back in time only and got to stay a month, which month would it be? July of 1844, to see the all of the power movements, or maybe no. So I would stay from July 11th to August 11th, because I would get to see all of the power moves. I would get to see the apostles arrive back in Nauvoo, and I would get to see the famed transfiguration, the apocryphal transfiguration of Brigham Young. I could actually see the speeches given by Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young that day, that fateful day, that the leadership of the church was restored, or was not restored, but was decided. And I'd be able to hear the conversations of the people. That's when that's the month that I would go back. That's a really good question. Damn, that's a really good question. All right. Do you think that Donald Trump is really Joseph's spirit baby? Yeah, of course. I've made the parallels many times. What was Joe's biggest mistake? Surrendering to go to Carthage. He should have just headed west. He should have headed west, and American history would be different. Who is your most admired historian? Claudia Bushman, H. Michael Marquardt, Joseph Geisner, Lavina Anderson. There's 4 for you. Those are absolutely the highest. Did I list 4 or 5? Anyway, yeah, those are my most admired historians. I can't say a singular. I can't do it. I just can't. I can't do it. How many hours per week did you research, write, produce? That's a tough one. So I basically had it structured that I would have to be at a certain point on each script or each episode every night of the week. So my research would begin Saturday afternoons usually. And then transition into Sunday would be basically all researching day, compiling documents day. And then beginning Monday morning would usually be a mix of writing and reading more, as well as usually editing Glassbox podcast every 2 weeks or doing other projects in conjunction with it. By Tuesday night, I had to have the script at 12 pages. By Wednesday night, I had to have the audio recorded and sent to Brian. By Thursday night, I had to have the episode re-listened through by myself, as well as rechecked all of the script, compiling all of the show notes, and putting together everything else on the back end, and then publishing on Thursday night. And then Friday was fuck off Friday. You wake up Saturday morning and repeat the same thing. I had Fridays off, and that was it. That was it. I had Fridays off. It was very, very consistently 12-hour days were the most common. That would give me, my time to work out in the morning, as well as time of fucking off in the evening. During the Road to Carthage series, though, I was destroyed. I was not getting very much sleep. It was very common for the entire Road to Carthage series to not get a fuck off Friday, and for my days to be 16 hours, because all of those scripts were, instead of being 12 to 20 pages like most of the podcast has been, all of those episodes, almost all of them, were over 30 pages. A couple of them were over 40 pages. So I basically doubled the workload without doubling the time to produce it. So the Road to Carthage series, most of those days I had no fuck off Fridays. It was 7 days a week. Not doing my Book of Mormon, not doing Patreon exclusive episodes, and straight anywhere from 12 to 16 hour days. That series was hard. It was really, really, really fucking hard. I'm glad to be on hiatus now. Let's see. Another from Richard. We'll rapid fire the last few of these. If you could be any of the OG Naked Mormonism characters, which one most resembles you? I feel some deep connections to Sidney Rigdon. If you could own any existing Mormon artifact, what would it be? Ensign Peak doesn't count. Yeah, it'd be nice to have $200 billion. Any existing Mormon artifact, I would take. That's a tough one. I would take Joe's peyote stone, his circular sand disc, or sandstone, seer stone that was carved out to look like a peyote button. That would be my one artifact. One document, I would take any copy of the Book of Commandments, but I would love to have David Whitmer's copy of the Book of Commandments. That would be so cool to have. Let's see, if you could own, not since Kirtland saved, or since Kirtland has the so-called church been hemorrhaging members as fast as today, what would Joe do? he would commit treason and raise a militia and commit war. That's what Joe would do. That seemed to be his thing. And then after he was arrested, he would flee to a different location and do it all again. From Richard, how old are you? I will be 30 in 5 months. Does your family know about your porn career? And have they ever listened? No, he says porn, euphemistically, because this is, sinning. This is all sinning, right? I don't actually have an OnlyFans page yet. Yes, all my family knows what I do. None of them talk to me anymore. And that's even now extending to my parents. And that sucks. But yeah, so they have listened. A lot of them have listened, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not a religion about families. It's a religion about tribalism. Near Palmyra, Kirtland, Far West, Nauvoo, Carthage, etc. Where would you settle if you had to buy a house there today? Near Palmyra. Actually, Rochester is a beautiful area. I was there for John Whitmer last year in September, and oh my God, it was beautiful. Driving the Miata on the coast of Lake Superior, just as the fog was rolling out in the early morning and the leaves are changing. It's just perfect. I live near Rochester, probably. Or Nauvoo. Nauvoo is actually a really pretty area too, even though it's flat. Were you offended or looking at porn? What was your final straw? No, I was lazy. Actually, I was lazy. I just hated going to church as a teenager. If Joseph would have run away yet again, what would you have predicted have happened? He had 9 lives because he was a pussycat. I already talked about that. Yeah. Who knows what that might have looked like? There are infinite variables, and it's fascinating speculation that I'm happy to engage in anytime. It's just a lot easier to engage in that speculation if I have like a sounding board, somebody who can like reflect the questions or their thoughts back at me. Let's see. All right. Lamest Mormon apologist or argument of all time. Dan Peterson, the horses are tapirs. That just it's a hallmark. It's glorious. It's the best apologetic ever. The horses are tapirs. God damn it. And chariots aren't actually chariots. I love that apologetic. It's hands down the best one. I love it so much. Yeah, let's see. And that is, yeah, that's all of them. That's all of the questions that we had to get through, about an hour and a half, as to be expected. To respond to Julie, yeah, I wanted to sin. And also, yeah, I was just a punk kid who really, 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 really hated going to church, but I hated going to school, so I dropped out of college too. Things that I don't like to do. I generally just don't do them. Probably said too much. Let's see. Yeah, so that's all. We're good. We're all done. We're all set. I really appreciate everybody tuning in for this kind of this Q&A to kick off the hiatus on the 200th anniversary of the First Division experience, supposedly. I know we're celebrating a special way tonight. I hope all of you are tonight. And there's going to be a lot more coming up in the future with the show as well. The show will continue to develop, and Naked Mormonism as a podcast is on hiatus. I promise it's hiatus. It is not over. For anyone who have raised in and sent me messages about fears regarding that, it is hiatus. I promise you. I got to get y'all the book. I got to get this book out. It's killing me to not have this book done, because it's a promise that I haven't lived up to from 4.5, 5 years ago now. And I'm sick of my living with myself with that hanging over my head. So I got to go away. But hey, if you're on the Patreon feed, patreon.com/Naked Mormonism, I'm going to keep plugging it because it's free. You're going to get periodic updates. You're going to get stuff, once a month, once every couple months, maybe once a week. Who knows? You'll see an email notification, or in your Patreon feed, it will, where you're subscribed to the Patreon exclusive feed, you're going to get an update. Hey, there's a new broadcast. There's a new episode. There's a new something. So sign up on patreon.com/Naked Mormonism. It's free, and there are dozens of hours of extra content on there. Dozens is wrong. Scores of hours of extra content, which doesn't really matter, I guess. Tons of extra content on the Patreon exclusive feed. Check it out. And you also get to be part of the Nemo Outer Darkness, which, yeah, that's pretty great too. Thanks for tuning in. Jeff asked a question: how can we support you during the break? You can share the show. You share the show with friends, because I'm really bad at plugging the show and at social media. Share it with friends. That's seriously the best thing that you can do is spreading it through word of mouth. A lot of people are overwhelmed by the information overload that we all have all day, every day. The only way that we can survive with the onslaught of information that hits us every day, with current events, with news, with pandemic, with all of the shit that we're always constantly dealing with, in addition to all of our daily duties of job, family, chores, all the shit. A lot of people are looking to escape somehow. And hey, taking a dive into a quirky 40 years of American history is a fun way to escape for a little while, escape for an hour or two a day. So share the show. Don't support me financially. Support the show by telling a friend about it, or by leaving a review on whatever podcasting app you use. Or when I do other stuff with other content creators during the hiatus, be sure to plug that too. Like I said, Myth Vision is coming up. There's going to be other stuff further down on the horizon of other collabs that I'm doing, other projects. So yeah, when you see those on your Facebook, on your Twitter, on your social media, give us a share, give us a retweet. That helps out a ton. So to Jeff, for everything that you've done, all of your support for building the website, to Julie for everything that you've done with the social media and with all of your correspondence, to Shannon for being the general authority of Glassbox and for setting in all these questions, and for just everyone who tunes in, and for, of course, Richard sending in this litany of all of these questions. That was so fantastic. And for everyone who asked questions today, and for everyone who tuned in, and for everyone who listens, thank you all so much. I seriously do appreciate it so much. Y'all make this job a whole lot of fun, and I really appreciate it. So let's call it good. Take care, everybody. Have yourself a good night, and enjoy my hiatus as much as I'm going to try and enjoy it. See you, everybody.